the judgment against Babylon. The vision which Isaias, son of Amos, saw against Babylon. Lift up a standard on the mountain of the plain. Exalt the voice to them. Beckon with the hand. Open the gates, ye rulers, I give command, and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time and insulting, a voice of many nations on the mountains, even like to that of many nations, a voice of kings and nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts has given command to a warlike nation, to come from a land afar off, from the utmost foundation of heaven. The Lord and his warriors are coming to destroy all the world. Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is near, and destruction from God shall arrive. Therefore every hand shall become powerless, and every soul of man shall be dismayed. The elders shall be troubled, and pangs shall seize them, as of a woman in travail. And they shall mourn one to another, and shall be amazed, and shall change their countenance as a flame. For behold, the day of the Lord is coming which cannot be escaped, a day of wrath and anger, to make the world desolate, and to destroy sinners out of it. For the stars of heaven, and Orion, and all the host of heaven, shall not give their light, and it shall be dark at sunrise, and the moon shall not give her light. And I will command evils for the whole world, and will visit their sins on the ungodly. And I will destroy the pride of transgressors, and will bring low the pride of the haughty. And they that are left shall be more precious than gold tried in the fire, and a man shall be more precious than the stone that is in Suphir. For the heavens shall be enraged, and the earth shall be shaken from her foundation, because of the fierce anger of the Lord of hosts, in the day in which his wrath shall come on. And they that are left shall be as a fleeing fawn, and as a stray sheep, and there shall be none to gather them, so that a man shall turn back to his people, and a man shall flee to his own land. For whosoever shall be taken shall be overcome, and they that are gathered together shall fall by the sword, and they shall dash their children before their eyes, and they shall spoil their houses, and shall take their wives. Behold, I will stir up against you the Medes, who do not regard silver, neither have they need of gold. They shall break the bows of the young men, and they shall have no mercy on your children, nor shall your eyes spare thy children. And Babylon, which is called glorious by the king of the Chaldeans, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall any enter into it for many generations. Neither shall the Arabians pass through it, nor shall shepherds at all rest in it. But wild beasts shall rest there, and the houses shall be filled with howling, and monsters shall rest there, and devils shall dance there, and satyrs shall dwell there, and hedgehogs shall make their nests in their houses. It will come soon, and will not tarry.
وهيكي هخيل هآدم لغوف על פני האדמה, ובנות יולדו להם. ויראו בני האלוהים את בנות האדם, כי טובות הנה. ויקחו להם נשים מכל אשר בחרו. הנפילים היו בארץ בימים ההם, וגם אחרי כן אשר יבואו בני האלוהים את בנות האדם, וילדו להם. המה הגיבורים אשר מלעולם, אנשי השם.
These are the words of an ancient legend recorded in Genesis 6, what many have often considered one of the most perplexing in the Hebrew Bible. Who were these sons of God, and what were the Nephilim, which the Bible says were their offspring? Among the civilizations of the ancient Near East, Mount Hermon, located just north of Israel on the border of Syria and Lebanon, was revered for its mythology and sacredness. In Semitic, its very root haram means taboo or consecrated. Containing at least 30 cult sites, its summit, called in Arabic Kasarantar, was the highest temple of the ancient world. It was therefore archaeologically monumental when, in 1869, one of Europe's earliest pioneers in biblical archaeology reached its summit to take detailed notes of his observations. That man was Sir Charles Warren, who, in addition to an extensive military career, served as London's famed chief of police during the Jack the Ripper murders. Most notably, upon the peak of this most sacred mountain, Warren would uncover a stele of grey limestone, cut with a Roman period Greek inscription. The stone, which stood outside a temple dedicated to the god of the mountain, reads, "According to the command of the greatest and holy God, Oi Omnuantes, those who take an oath, or those of oath, proceed." Fast forward to early 1947, where a teenage Bedouin shepherd known to his tribe as Muhammad al-Dhibu, or Muhammad the Wolf, is searching for a stray goat along the desolate cliffs of the western shore of the Dead Sea in modern Israel. It is said that, believing his animal to have taken shade in one of the region's caves, he begins throwing stones into them, but instead of the bleat of a goat, the distinct sound of shattering pottery emerged from within its black depths. Spooked that the pottery may indicate the property of some territorial desert genie, it is said that the wolf initially chose to leave it undisturbed. However, he would return the next day with his cousin after his curiosity haunted his sleep all night before. And so, the first collections of the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. Among the ensuing finds, in Cave 4, would surface Aramaic fragments of a corpus sacred to many early Jews and Christians, and still revered and preserved in the modern Ethiopic Church, the Scroll of Enoch. The old lore in Enoch's first book of Watchers claims that Genesis 6 refers to a time when divine beings from heaven descended to earth on Mount Hermon in physical form, and produced offspring with the daughters of man. These divine human hybrid offspring were powerful giants called Nephilim, and what we know as demons, or Shadim in Hebrew, are now the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. Where the Hermon summit inscription commands initiates to be bound by an oath before entering, it is said that the entities who descended on Hermon also said, "Let us all swear an oath, and all bind one another that we shall not any of us turn aside from this council until we do this deed." Then they all swore together and bound one another by imprecations. And they were all of them 200 who came down in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called the mountain Hermon because they swore and bound one another by imprecations upon it. When I first began researching this passage in college, I found that many modern theologians oppose the ancient view that Genesis 6 intends to say that human beings were producing offspring with supernatural entities. Believing the Enoch corpus to be a fanciful Jewish misinterpretation, those who oppose the supernatural view usually believe that the sons of God refer to human rulers, and that the Nephilim were simply a bloodline of thoroughly human fallen warriors. But is it correct to dismiss the supernatural view? In this video, I want to present several of the reasons why I believe the supernatural view is by far the more superior interpretation. The natural place to begin with the identity of the Nephilim is the etymology of the term. The vast majority of academic dictionaries routinely explain this word as the masculine plural form of the Hebrew verb nephal, which means to fall, in other words, the fallen ones. But the linguist Michael Heiser has pointed out a problem for this view. The word Nephilim occurs 3 times in the Bible. In 2 of these cases, a stem of nun, fe, lamed for to fall makes intuitive sense. But in Numbers 13:33, there's a complication with this etymology. There the word is spelled with an extra yod in its center. Biblical Hebrew had no symbols for vowels, so sometimes consonants that double as vowels, like the letter Y, could be used to clarify the presence of a vowel pronunciation in a spelling. In this variant spelling in Numbers 13, we see a scribal gloss, indicating the base word of Nephilim was originally pronounced with a long E. This means that the word Nephilim can't be derived from a verb like to fall, because verbal forms in Hebrew are never spelled this way. The masculine plural participle of Nephal is patterned with a long O instead of an E. There is, however, an alternative root that does conform to the variant spelling, the Aramaic noun Naphil. This Aramaic root contains a middle yod and would therefore resolve the morphological problem, but does its meaning provide explanatory power? The Aramaic word Naphil means giant. This etymology is powerfully supported by the fact that Jewish texts from the intertestamental period consistently translate the Nephilim with the Greek word gigantes. Notice also the gigantism of the Nephilim tribes in the Bible, for example, Numbers 13:32-33. All the people we saw in the land are of great height, and there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. It makes little sense that regular human rulers would produce giant bloodlines. However, the gigantism of the Nephilim coheres well with the view that they were fathered by divine beings. Additional support for the divine interpretation comes from the virtually unanimous witness of early Jewish interpretation in general, but I will focus here only on the New Testament, particularly Jude 6-7 and 2 Peter 2:4. Both of these passages reference rebellious angels kept in chains under gloomy darkness until a day of judgment. But how can we know that Peter and Jude here are referring to the angels being punished for the sort of crimes described in Enoch? First, the Greek word hell in 2 Peter is not the expected word Hades or Gehenna, but the strange word Tartarus, which occurs nowhere else in the New Testament. As David Bartlett writes, this term was used in Greek mythology to describe, quote, the lowest part of the underworld, where the Titan giants were kept in chains by Greek gods for their rebellion against them. Pearson's study confirms this is certainly the correct background for this passage, because the odd reference to these angels being bound in chains and in gloomy darkness occurs in conceptual and linguistic parallel in Hesiod's description of the Titan's imprisonment. Ancient Jewish authors drew a direct parallel to the old Greek myth that the Titans were chained within the underworld, and the tradition about the same happening to the Watchers. Enoch especially makes this connection to the Greek myth explicit in its telling of the legend. So when Peter and Jude relate the sin of these angels to the Greek concept of these entities being bound in Tartarus, they are showing that they hold to the old tradition shared by Enoch. This should come as no surprise, considering Jude especially has been shown to be heavily reliant on themes and terms found in Greek Enoch, and even approvingly quotes Enoch by name in chapter 14. Observe again Jude 6-7. And the angels, who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which like them, totois, indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. Does the phrase which likewise indulged in sexual immorality refer back to the cities surrounding Sodom and Gomorrah, or is its antecedent the angels? In Greek, the gender and number of the pronoun totois is masculine plural. It therefore doesn't grammatically agree with cities because that word is feminine. However, totois corresponds in number and gender to the term for angels, making it the only candidate as the antecedent. These angels were punished in Jude's mind for sexual immorality. In an article published in the Journal for the Study of the Pseudepigrapha, The Estonian Assyriologist Amar Anis discusses Mesopotamian tablets that allude to a group of deities called Apkallus. In Babylonian myth, before the Great Flood, these creatures were believed to have first delivered culture and civilization to humanity. Often in Babylonian buildings, little statues of these Apkallu were placed in deposits of brick, under pavement and flanking walls and gates. The idea was that they would serve as divine sentinels, watching over and protecting the occupants. Anis recognized that some of the inscriptions point-blank title these Apkallu guardians Watchers. The Watchers are not just found in extra-biblical books like Enoch, but in Daniel 4:13 and 4:17, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar reports visions he had of a, quote, watcher descending from heaven, and the Aramaic of verse 17 likewise pairs the decree of these watchers with the decree of the Kadashin, the Holy Ones, one of the most common titles for the heavenly sons of God. So the tradition about the watchers preserved in Enoch was not just a later Jewish invention, rather it is best explained as dating back to Israel's exile in Babylonia, when Judaism would have interacted with Mesopotamian myth. This is no surprise considering Genesis 6 immediately commences with the flood story, which likewise shows literary awareness of the Mesopotamian flood legend. Where mainstream Babylonian religion casts these entities as good benefactors of humanity, the Bible takes a position that they were corruptors of it, that motivated God's bringing of the flood. So, the supernatural interpretation is supported by the gigantism of the Nephilim in the Bible. It is the view taken by the New Testament authors. And now, we have contemporaneous inscription evidence demonstrating the Mesopotamian context of the legend, and the title, Watchers.
On a rather strange topic tonight. We're going to talk about UFOs. Now, this is an area that most people tend to relegate to the demented or incompetent or fringe type people, and yet the entertainment industry, of course, has picked up on this with the a crop circle thing called Signs, which many may have seen, and also Steven Spielberg did a mini-series called Taken, focusing on the abductions and so forth. And while these things are interesting entertainment, they are replete, of course, with all kinds of misinformation and legends and half-truths that get mingled with facts so that it's really just entertainment. But one of the things you and I have to face is what is the real reality here? Is this just a bunch of nonsense, a composite of hoaxes and pranks by various people through the years? Or is there something really going on? One of the things we want to explore a little tonight is, are the UFOs real? And if so, where are they from? What's their agenda? Are they friendly or hostile? And most important, what does the Bible say about them? So we're going to explore that tonight as we go forth on our exploration of UFOs and the strange term, the Nephilim. What is that all about? But before we start, since we are dealing with a very, very complicated area, an area where many of us have already formed opinions, let me remind you of there's a principle. According to Edmund Spencer, he articulated this, there's a principle which is a bar against all information. It's proof against all argument. And it's something which cannot fail to keep man in everlasting ignorance. And that principle is condemnation before investigation. So one of our challenges as we go into this very complicated topic is to set aside our prejudices and presuppositions, and let's see what we can find out. Now, the same idea is not only articulated by Edmund Spencer, but it also is in our collection of Proverbs by Solomon, who reminds us that he that answereth the matter before he heareth it, it is a folly and a shame unto him. So one of our challenges tonight is sort of set aside what we think we may have heard or what our basic prejudices are, and let's see what we can find out that might be new. Now, many of us, of course, have seen photographs, many of which are hoaxes, contrived, and so forth. There are many of these in the literature. I'm sure you've seen all kinds. The problem is that not all of them are. It may surprise you to learn that there are over 3,000 authenticated photographs in the classified community that are authenticated. So what's really going on here? See, the problem we have in researching this area is there is so much that's uncorroborated. There's a lot of deliberate disinformation, and certainly a lot of data which is unreliable. And the problem is, when you strip away the hoaxes and you strip away the nonsense and you set aside the uncorroborated, there still is too much to ignore that is substantiated, that involves multiple reliable witnesses, including multiple radar sightings. And radars generally don't have hallucinations. And this idea of being plotted simultaneously on multiple radars is something that should get our attention. And now, give you one example. Back on June 18th of 1997, there was a strange vehicle that appeared over Phoenix, Arizona. In fact, went over most of the state at about 30 miles an hour, which is very slow for an airborne vehicle. There were some that said they felt they could have hit it with a ball that seemed that close as it went over. And it created quite a stir. And on March 13th, there were sightings all the way from Casa Grande and Chandler all the way up through the northern part of the state, Prescott and so forth. So it wasn't just a local phenomenon, and it created quite a stir. Now, the governor of Arizona made a big mistake by treating a press conference the following morning lightly, as humor. And it didn't go over very well because people were upset because they were getting stonewalled by the government. Even though there were denials by the Air Force, they saw the fighter jets sortie after them and so on, so it created quite a stir. It wasn't picked up in the national media. It was picked up, of course, substantially in the local media, that is in the state of Arizona. And one of the things that's strange about this is that it happened in March of 1997. It didn't show up until June 18th. And for what's strange to me is not just the event that happened in March, but there was no word about it in the national media. But then for some reason, no obvious reason, on June 18th, it was on the front page of USA Today. That's where this picture came from. It was on the NBC, CBS, CNN, all the major networks had this brief comment about what happened. What was puzzling about it didn't happen on June 18th, it happened back in March. And I haven't been able to determine what triggered the news media to make it a big event at that time. It's one thing it does demonstrate is how the news is managed, because all the networks pick it up at the same time for no ostensible reason. But as we talk about these kinds of things, sooner or later we have to focus on the Roswell incident. And many of you realize that approximately July 4th, a few days following maybe, some object, that's in 1947, some object landed near Roswell, New Mexico. And Sheriff George Wilcox contacted the Roswell Army Airfield regarding wreckage that was discovered on Max Brazel's ranch or in that area. The Army seals off the area and confiscates everything that was there. And on the 8th of July, Colonel William Blanchard, who was commander of the 509th Bomb Group, that was our primary atomic bomb group in those days, he issued an official press release stating that the wreckage of a crashed disk had been recovered. Now, this press release went out early enough on July 8th to be picked up by 30 newspapers across the country. And so it is. And this is a snapshot of what it looks like. The RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region and so forth. And no details of flying disc are revealed, etc., etc. Except within hours, something very strange happens. A second press release, which had tried to rescind the first one, was issued from the office of Brigadier General Roger Ramey, who was commander of the 8th Air Force. He resides at Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas, which is about 400 miles away from the incident. But within hours, General Ramey issues a countermanding release, and he claimed that Colonel Blanchard and the officers of the 509th at Roswell had made an unbelievably foolish mistake, that somehow they incorrectly identified a weather balloon and its radar reflector as the wreckage of a crashed disk. Now, frankly, everyone that heard this, that thought about it a little bit, realized that was just a very contrived cover story. And this press release that in effect hit the next day by General Ramey caused, it was in effect a denial, did not explain why they confiscated everything, why the whole subject has been classified to this day. And now what that really did, this absurd cover story, frankly, just fueled the 50 years, the intervening 50 years of conjectures and all kinds of anecdotal testimonies of people who were involved peripherally. All kinds of stories have been echoing throughout this half century that's transpired since July of 1947. And the stories typically maintain that there were 4 alien occupants of this disk, that 3 of them were dead, 1 was still alive. All these presumably were taken off to the never land of military security, and there's all kinds of stories that are too preposterous to really accept, and yet it continues. The great mystery about, when I travel, one of the most often questions I get is, what really happened at Roswell? Well, we don't really know what happened at Roswell. It's been classified, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We do know something that happened 9 months after the Roswell incident. Al Gore was born. And it turns out he really was. The Roswell incident occurred nominally about the days following July 4th in 1947. His birthday is March 31st of 1948, and that makes a cute quip, because every audiences always seem to enjoy that kind of a crack, and obviously I'm not being serious, that there's a linkage really. But in any case, there is one reason I want to dwell on this a little bit, because for 50 years people have conjectured what really happened there, and the Air Force has contrived one thin cover story after another over the years, each one sillier than the first, each one easily refuted by anyone that does a little homework. So you wonder, why is this thing still classified? Several presidents and half a dozen congressmen have tried to crack the security surrounding Roswell to no avail. What could have happened there that is still to this day regarded as an item of national security? And now, interestingly enough, just in the last few months, there appears that we now have what some people would call the smoking gun. There is some tangible evidence that's finally emerged that there was a crash of some kind, and it did have victims of some sort. You see, when General Ramey at Fort Worth issued that cover story, the press was present, and many pictures were taken. And James Bond Johnson of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram was among them. And on July 8th, he took a photograph, which a number of the photographs happened to show General Ramey clutching a sheaf of papers in his hand that apparently was a communique to Washington, D.C., and he happened to have that in his hand while he was going through this explanation and demonstrating that this really was a weather balloon. They had some props there that they showed and so forth. Well, it turns out that was in July 47. Since 1947, we've made a lot of progress in digital imaging technology. And this sheaf of paper that was photographed was analyzed with a digital photo scanner and enlarged and enhanced the words printed on the folded piece of paper. And then using a program for digital enhancement and analysis, it's now been reported on Associated Press on November 22nd of the year 2002 that David Rudiak was able to identify several key phrases on that sheaf of paper that General Ramey was clutching during that press conference. There's a phrase, the victims of the wreck, and also the phrase, in the disk they will ship. Lots of other words that were hard to, more conjectural is what they said, but the point is, here's a communication in his hand going to Washington that speaks of victims of the wreck and speaks of a disc that they're going to ship. While he's covering the story that Colonel Blanchard was all mixed up, this is just a weather balloon. So finally, the UFO researchers have something tangible to go on, because up till now it's been a spooky thing. Let's shift a little bit from 47 to July 19th through the 26th, about a week, in 1952. I happen to remember this vividly because in June 30th of 1952, I was entering the United States Naval Academy, so I was a plebe, a plebe at Annapolis when this was in the papers and much talked about at the time. It turns out a number of UFOs harassed Washington National Airport, which in those days was the only airport there. We didn't have Dulles, this is before Dulles, and also Andrews Air Force Base, so badly they had to shut down the air traffic. And this went on and off and on for a week. And it was in the papers, because every time the Air Force would alert jets to investigate what these things were, they would disappear. As soon as the jets landed, they came back. And fiery objects overrun jets over Capitol in the Washington Post. These are headlines from that period. Now, one of the things, there again, they never really explained it. They issued some cover stories, but the truth of the matter is they didn't know what it was, and it wasn't just an incident one night. It went off and on for the better part of a week. Again, it created a problem just in blocking all the phone traffic, because everybody's calling what's going on and so forth, and so something real was happening, because you're talking here multiple radars. This isn't some, impressionable, unprofessional observer. This was the air controllers at Washington National and Andrews Air Force Base, and never explained, at least not to the public. 1993, by the way, there are thousands of these things to select from. I've just picked a few that seem representative. Over in Mexico City in 1993, the population by the thousands were upset and disturbed by what went on. Seoul, South Korea, November 23rd of 1996, CNN and Reuters reported a huge cigar-shaped UFO that was televised for 10 minutes on national television. When we talk about witnesses, there's all kinds of people, many very reliable professionals that have contributed to this background, but the ones that you and I would tend to presume would be the most reputable, most trained, and most competent in this area would be our astronauts. You think they know something about it. Do you realize that 13 of them have gone on record of seeing UFOs while they were doing their missions? Ed Mitchell, Apollo 14, April 1996, and this was on Dateline NBC. He said, NASA is covering up what really happened at Roswell, New Mexico. See, this isn't just the presumption of some journalists or the tabloids at the checkout stands in the market. These are serious people saying that something is being covered up. Astronaut Gordon Cooper has made many talks. In May 15th of 1963, he did the 22-orbit Mercury capsule. He saw a green UFO, which was also at the same time he saw it tracked by the radar in Australia. It corroborated this. And he's testified before the United Nations that UFOs are visiting this planet. And in May 1996, he said, we are being visited by aliens. So he's spoken a lot about this, so much so that some people tend to write him off. James Lovell, Frank Borman, Gemini 7, December 1965. On the second orbit of their 2-week flight, they saw a UFO. Gemini Control presumed it was the stage of their own Titan booster, but they indicated that they had both the booster and the UFO in sight, so that doesn't quite jive. Walter Schirra, these are all familiar names to most of us. Mercury 8, 1968. He was the first guy to use the term Santa Claus to indicate UFOs are near the space capsule. And so this was about December, so everybody thought that this was just a cute quip, but it was a code word. And it was later, in 1979, Maurice Chatelain, the chief of NASA Communications, confirmed that the Santa Claus phrase was a prearranged code word to deal with the UFOs without alarming the public. And Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, these familiar names to you? Are these guys competent? On Apollo 11, July 21st, 1969, both apparently saw lights in and on crater, and there are unconfirmed reports that there were other spacecraft there. Some of this is classified, gets classified quickly, so we're treading on dangerous ground. But they have said 2 large objects, we're watching them. And Armstrong is quoted in some reports of a CIA cover-up. Now those reports get squelched, of course, so it's hard to separate what was just urban legend and what really happened. But if you go to Ed White, James McDivitt, James Lovell, Borman, Schirra, Gordon Cooper, these guys have all reported UFOs. Neil Armstrong, Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin, Apollo 11, Ed Mitchell, Apollo 14, and on it goes. And one of the most interesting ones is John Blaha. He was a veteran of 5 space shuttle missions. He also was a relatively recent resident of the Russian Mir space station. This is a few years ago. March 24th of 1989, an amateur radio operator picked up an intercept. Said, "Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under observation." And very impressive to listen to that soundtrack and hear the familiar voice say these rather strange things. So UFOs, we could go on and on. The main point I'm trying to do at this point, just indicate there are some people that you would consider competent and reliable in multiple names that are reporting these things are real. And I would not attribute all of these to hallucinations or being impressionable or what have you. In fact, if you start looking into this area as an area of research, you'll find it extremely difficult because there are 6,000 professional publications in English alone that deal with this. There are 2,200 foreign publications, 1,350 UFO-related periodicals. And some of these, if you look at the books in the library, there are over 700 books that deal with UFOs just in the period from the 17th century to the First World War. Excuse me, the Second World War, from 1650 to about 1945. There are over 300 books prior to the 17th century that deal with UFOs in the ancient times. So what on earth is this all about?
Giants! It's good to be back. Free! Fight!
Go here.
At last, mankind have returned. They're uglier than I remember.
We gods are losing our power. We believed Titans to be imprisoned forever. Now, they're breaking free.
Chaos. The end of the world. What am I meant to do?
Proceed. I need your help.
This is for gods, not humans.
You will learn someday that being half human makes you stronger than a god. It is emptying all its demons onto the earth.
Fearsome Cyclops are a breed of cannibal giants endowed with brute strength. They're as tall as a tree, wield giant weapons, and stalk ancient forests in search of their next meal. So powerful are these primitive monsters, any man who crosses their path will find their bones ground to dust.
expecting someone?
The legends are true.
Prepare for battle!
For between heaven and earth is a perilous place, home to a fearsome giant race who hunger to conquer the mortals below, waiting for the seeds of revenge to grow.
Travelers in the Old Testament were spirits that would travel or cross over from one plane of existence to another. In other words, the realm of the dead to the land of the living. When the Nephilim returned, it would literally be an army of the evil dead, like the ultimate zombie apocalypse. Now, I believe that the Nephilim will return. I believe they're going to be the demons who possess a human army. When the Nephilim return, and we understand that the Nephilim, the spirits of the Nephilim that were destroyed in the days of Noah, in the flood, were barred entrance into the afterlife, into the netherworld, into heaven, basically condemned to roam the earth. That was the belief of the early church. That was the belief of the Jews in the time of Jesus and through all, the Old Testament period. It wasn't until Augustine in about the 5th century that that belief went away. He also basically turned the church away from believing that the Nephilim had been created at all. Ezekiel, though, saw it. And this is the thing. God bless people like L.A. Marzulli who've been, teaching this for a long time. He's right. The Nephilim are returning. Where I differ with L.A., and I've got to give him credit, because without him and his book Nephilim, which was a novel that got me down this path, I wouldn't be here right now. But I think Ezekiel 39 is a clue, but you got to understand the worldview of the prophets to understand what Ezekiel was writing. In Ezekiel 39, he's writing about the culmination of the war of Gog and Magog, and Gog was the Old Testament Antichrist figure. Okay, he is the figure that John in the Book of Revelation calls the Antichrist. That is the same war that culminates with the Battle of Armageddon, which is fought for the Har Moed, God's Mount of Assembly, which is Zion, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Ezekiel says, God said that he will prepare a place in Israel for burial of Magog, the forces of Magog. The Valley of the Travelers east of the sea refers to east of the Dead Sea, and it will block the travelers. The key is understanding that travelers in the Old Testament concept, in the Old Testament world, were spirits that would travel or cross over from one plane of existence to another. In other words, the realm of the dead to the land of the living. The places where he identifies east of the Dead Sea are places that during the Exodus, the stations of the Exodus, refer to a couple of places that are named for these interactions with the spirit realm. One of the stops in the Exodus, one of the stations of the Exodus is called Ovoth, which means spirits of the dead. It's based on a root word Ov, which means medium. The medium of Endor that Saul went to see was the Ov of Endor. In fact, one of the giants killed by David's men, Ishbi, they condensed the word. Ishbi Benab is how it looks to us in English. Ishbi Ben Ov. Ishbi, son of the necromancer, son of the medium. And he was of the descendants of the Rapha, the sons of the Rephaim. The Rephaim were these spirits that the Amorites, the Canaanites, believed were the spirits of the mighty men who were of old, the ancestors of their kings. They were called in Canaanite texts, called by scholars the Rephaim texts, written about the time of the Judges, where these Rephaim were summoned through necromancy rituals to the tabernacle of El, Mount Hermon, where El, they believed, would speak words of revivification to resurrect these spirits that were called warriors of Baal. And in these texts, they're described as warriors. They mount their chariots and they travel first one day and then another. And at dawn of the third day, they arrive to be resurrected. Like Jesus, who went down and preached and proclaimed to the spirits in prison until dawn of the third day, when he arrived, except that he really was resurrected. And Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 39, says, this is where these travelers will be buried. Another one of the stops on the, in fact, the mountain where Moses was led by God to get his only view of the Holy Land, the Promised Land. Climb this mountain of the Avarim. In Hebrew, that means travelers. Mount Nebo is the mountain of the travelers. It's right there across from Jericho in the plains of Moab. And that's where this demonic army will fall. Now, I believe that the Nephilim will return. I believe they're going to be the demons who possess a human army. I think by this point the restrainer will have been removed. The church will be removed. So I pray I'm right, that we won't be here for that day, because that's the day of Armageddon. And when this demonic army comes against Jerusalem to try to claim God's Mount of Assembly, just like Lucifer in Isaiah 14, I will establish my Mount of Assembly on Mount Zaphon, raise himself above the stars, the angels of God. On that day, when God personally takes the battlefield, which Ezekiel describes, the travelers will be destroyed. And interestingly, in that verse in Ezekiel 39, he says, then the world will know I am the Holy One in Israel. That phrase is similar to one that we see in the Old Testament many times. The Holy One of Israel. Ezekiel 39, after he destroys the Antichrist army in the battle of Armageddon that ends the war of Gog and Magog, he becomes the Holy One in Israel because he's on the battlefield. I mean, the Nephilim have always been here. If they're the spirits of those who died in the flood 6,000 years ago, they've always been with us, because demons have always been with us. But on that day, they will be inhabiting the bodies of I believe, this army that comes against Israel. It will literally be an army of the evil dead, like the ultimate zombie apocalypse. God puts a stop to it. And what does it mean when Ezekiel writes in Ezekiel 39:11, it will block the travelers? The word translated block is only used one other place in the Bible. It's in Deuteronomy, the verse that talks about thou shalt not muzzle an ox when he treads out the grain. Muzzle. I'm not quite sure what that means, but if we take it in context of what Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, that we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed, we will be resurrected. Maybe that's what God is saying. I will block the travelers. They're dead and they are staying dead when the rest of us are resurrected into new glorified bodies. Well, in Isaiah 14, Lucifer, which is really kind of a mistranslation. The Hebrew is Halel ben Shakar, which means light bringer, son of the dawn. Shakar was actually a deity in the Canaanite religion, dawn. But when Jerome translated the Bible into the Latin, the Vulgate translation, he used the the Latin equivalent of light bringer, lux ferus, light bringer. And we English speakers have just sort of adopted that as a personal name, Lucifer. Well, again, it really just means light bringer. Baal, the storm god, who was the chief god, the king of the gods, called a son of El in the Canaanite religion, but he became the king of the gods by defeating the god of death and defeating the god of the sea. Similar to the tension in Greek mythology, by the way, between the storm god Zeus, the god of the sea, Poseidon, and the god of death, Hades. In Canaanite religion, Baal had to defeat the god of death, Mot, and the god of the sea, called Yam, in order to become the king of the gods. In the New Testament, Jesus, confronted by the Pharisees, says, he's casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul, which means Baal the prince. Baal the prince of demons, I guess. Jesus also, in Revelation 2, in the letter to the church of Pergamum, says, I know where you live, it's where Satan's seat, it's where Satan dwells. Satan's seat in Pergamum. Well, that was the great altar of Zeus, who, like Baal, was a storm god. The Greeks got their religion from the Canaanites. So, Satan to Jesus, and Jesus, by the way, in replying to the Pharisees, connected Beelzebul, Baal the prince, to Satan. So Jesus identified the storm god as Satan. Isaiah 14, storm god Lucifer. So yes, Lucifer is Baal, is Satan. But Isaiah 14 says that what he was trying to do was to establish his mount of assembly in the heights of the north, the sides of the north, the uttermost north. There are a few English translations that actually get it right. This actually points back to the mountain that was sacred to the storm god Baal, or Hadad was his proper name. Baal just means Lord, which sort of became a proper name over time. But it was also considered sacred to the storm gods of the Hurrians, called Teshub, the storm god of the Hittites, called Tarhuns, the storm god of the Greeks, called Zeus, actually fought a major battle there against the god of chaos, Typhon, at Mount Zaphon. Well, the phrase in Isaiah 14, translated sides of the north, heights of the north, uttermost north, Yarakate Tsephon, is only used 3 times in the Bible. There, Psalm 48, where Mount Tsephon was compared to Mount Zion, that mountain, Mount Tsephon, was so important to the Hebrews because it was so important to their neighbors in Canaan that Tsephon became the word for the compass point north. In every other Semitic language from the ancient Near East, the word for north is Simal. But in Hebrew, it's Tsephon. That's how important that was because of its relationship to that god. So, El became the generic term for God in the Semitic world. In fact, it became so prominent that some scholars now are convinced that the name of the old god of the Sumerians, Enlil, which they used to believe was based on the Sumerian words En, which means Lord, and Lil, which means wind or ether or something. They're now believing that that's actually just a corruption of the Semitic Il-Ilu, meaning God of gods. That in other words, instead of being a Sumerian god, that Enlil, who was then replaced by Marduk in the Babylonian cosmology, which they just inherited from the Sumerians, more or less, was actually a Semitic god who was brought from the northwest, where we find Dagon, same god, different name, El, same god, different name, Kumarbi of the Hurrians and Hittites, same god, different name, Baal-Haman of the Phoenicians, same god, different name. Their points of origin all point to northern Syria or southern Turkey, not far from the mountain where Baal the storm god, was supposed to have built his temple, Mount Tsephon. So this old god, this El or Il-Ilu, god of gods, this old, I argue, is actually Kronos of the Greeks, Saturn of the Romans, king of the Titans, who, like the Watchers from Mount Hermon, was condemned to Tartarus. 2 Peter 2:4 says that the angels who sinned were thrust down to hell. That's how most English translations read. But the Greek word translated hell is actually Tartarau, which means Tartarus, thrust down to Tartarus. In the Greek mind, that's a different place from Hades. That's a special level of netherworld prison reserved for the old gods, the supernatural threats to the divine order.
Now, we are approaching the end times. In the end times, everything is going to turn topsy-turvy. When everything turns topsy-turvy, there is going to arise a breed of people that will be a mixed breed between evil spirits and human genes. That will be a breed. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the last days. There will be this breed. If you read Daniel chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar sees the statue, and then the scripture where it says the feet is like clay and iron, that will be like together, but they will not be together. And then it says there a small little word which all of us overlook, and he will mingle together with the sons of men. Who is the he that will mingle again? That goes back to the days of Noah, how the evil spirits mingled with the sons of men, and a different race, a different breed was produced on the earth. And during that breed, that particular group of people they introduce demon worship, demon sacrifice, and all kinds of witchcraft practices were introduced by those demons, by that breed. See, it's an angelic breed, fallen angels and humans joined together. They have special kind of wisdom, and they revealed all this to humankind, and they practice sacrificing their children to fire, sacrificing their children to Moloch, sacrificing their children to Satan. A blood sacrifice. It all started not just in India, where there's so much of blood sacrifice been given, but from the days of Noah, when the human sacrifice was given to the demons. It all started from that day, when God destroyed the people of Noah's days through the flood. The flesh got killed, not the soul and the spirit. They live on. Because they lived on, that is why during the conquest of Canaan, you'll find that there were giants in the land. Where did those giants come from? I used to wonder, where did the giants come from? When all the giants were killed in the deluge, then where did these sons of Zumin come from? Goliath and his brothers and all these Anakim. Sounds like a name from Star Wars. Anakim, this Kim, that Kim, several Kims, They are all the various giant race groups that were living during that time. Where did they come from? The soul lives on. And from those times till today, there is an intermingling taking place which we are not aware of. But in the last days, this will escalate. This will escalate into a larger proportion. The Antichrist needs an army of that breed. He needs that. And that is why this group will be resurrected, or they will come back again on the scene. It will make the way for the intermingling of the seed of unrighteousness with the seed of righteousness. This will take place in the last days. And when this seed is there will be anarchy, great chaos, great mass killings taking place in great numbers. So how are we going to protect ourselves in the last days? Now there is a prophecy in the Bible that says, in the last days, the spade and the flesh hooks will all be turned into weapons of war. They will be all turned into weapons of war. So, in the end times, just like how God commanded Israel to kill their enemies for their survival, for their living in the land, God will need to give us new set of commandments. Version 3.0. This is not laughing matter, This is very serious stuff that we are going to enter into. The days are already here. We are at the doorstep now. I read about a pastor, a minister of God, an American minister who went to London and he stood in the streets and preached against the gays. And a passerby who was a gay was so offended by his preaching because he boldly said a statement like this: the lifestyle of gay, homosexuality, is sin in the eyes of God. That man was so offended, he reported the minister to the police. The police came, arrested him, and he was put in prison one entire day, taken down all his statement, and then he was let free with a warning never to speak on such topics again. You see, such laws are already here at our doorstep. So what will we do? Keep mum about it? And I'm glad that Brother Bobby very forcefully last night spoke against it. How many of us will do that? Are we going to be a chicken? Those days are right at our doorstep. Those days are not very far into the future, you know, right at your doorstep.
Peter J for the real world, wide hood star.
You know I've tried and tried, still I can't get you off my mind. I think about you all the time, girl. I know it's plain to see, girl, you were meant for me. I could be a dream, and you could be my fantasy, girl.
Butterfly doors, dumb slap, make it real though, but love don't come with that. It feel like it though till you lose what you got. So let me talk to you till you understand the chat. Let's get to know each other. I'm a CEO, I can meet your father. He'll be proud of you. I'm ill, I'm on the radio. I really rap, not a cat who just say dude. I'm on MTV, you see me from the hood. We got shit poppin'. I've been around the world. Windows up, tacked out, make a smoke twirl. I bring you everywhere I go. You my downest girl.
You know I've tried and tried, still I can't get you